Hey everyone, this is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology, and today we are going to take a look at the new moon in Gemini. This is a really interesting new moon because of the big lineup of planets that are all in Gemini right now. Jupiter's coming off a trine to Pluto. We've got the host Mercury co-present in the sign. We've got Venus at the heart of the sun, cazimi. It's a packed house right now in the temple of Gemini. And this new moon is engaging with a square to Saturn in Pisces. So we are going to talk about some of the key features of this new moon cycle in Gemini and give you some broad ideas about what to watch for over the entirety of the upcoming lunation cycle based on this seeding point. So it's a kind of big picture day today. I think there's a lot of practical takeaways, but we are going to be looking at some of the signatures that shape the entirety of the next lunar cycle. So anyway, that's our agenda for today. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you've got good stories to share, you know we love to hear from you guys. You can find transcripts of any of my daily talks on the website, which is nightlightastrology.com. Now, I'm going to take you over there. There are two promotions that I want to share with you right now. If you go to the events page, click on live talks. My monthly webinar this month in the month of June, on June 13th from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern, I'm giving a talk called The 12th House, The World We Struggle to See. You are going to get to know the 12th house, set aside some misconceptions about the 12th house, and then we're going to be looking at all of the unique relationships between the ascending sign and the 12th whole sign. That is your rising sign and your 12th house by whole sign, which gives us some real insight into the kind of healing potential that exists in your birth chart between the conscious sense of self that you carry through the ascending sign and that more hidden or secretive dimension of the 12th house that often remains sort of hidden from our conscious awareness in the 12th. So this will be something really accessible for everybody. I highly recommend checking this out if you want to do a little bit of that healing work in your birth chart and get to know the 12th house better as a student. Anyway, so if you register for that talk on the website and you cannot make it live, we give you the webinar link, but we also give you a link to download the recording so you can watch it whenever you want. The other thing I am promoting right now, of course, our new programs begin in the month of June. First year course starts on June 16th with Jupiter trining Pluto, both in air signs. It is a great time to begin a transformational journey with the subject of astrology. It's a great signature to study under. It's a great program. It's our first year course in ancient astrology. I call it ancient astrology for the modern mystic because it also includes modern archetypal and psychological astrology. That's sort of baked into me at this point. So you'll find that it's a course that sort of blends both Hellenistic and modern elements together. But it is a course in Hellenistic astrology. If you're interested in learning more about the ancient approach to astrology, it's fascinating. You can check it out on the website there on the first year course page. Need-based tuition is at the bottom. If you're someone who needs a little help to make the course happen, please feel free to use the tuition assistance. It's there to make sure that nobody's priced out if you'd like to study but have a limit on your budget or are experiencing financial hardship. The Horary astrology course, of course, our year 2 program begins. We have to have taken year 1. So for most people, that's going to be only applicable to people who are currently enrolled in the year 1 program. I don't spend as much time promoting that one on my YouTube channel here. Introduction to Horary begins on June 22nd. This is a fantastic course for people who have a little understanding of traditional astrology and want to learn the specific art and craft of Horary. After today's video, if you stick around, there's an informational video I've tagged onto the end showing you a horary reading and showing you what horary astrology is. It's a very specific predictive form of astrology that's old and very beautiful. It's one of my favorite things in the world to teach and practice. So stick around afterward today if you want to learn more about that. Any questions about anything you find on the website or our upcoming programs, email us info@nightlightastrology.com. Okay, well, thank you guys for letting me run through those promotions for the day. And let's turn our attention now to the real-time clock where we find ourselves preparing for this new moon. Now, the new moon, here we go. Oh, there we are. Had to get it around there. The new moon is taking place at about 16 degrees of Gemini. And you'll see that Venus is still just half a degree off from an exact conjunction to the sun. And depending on the measurement used for cazimi, some astrologers use the same degree, some within a quarter of a degree, and so on. So there's, basically there's a little wiggle room here and some room for debate, but Venus is at the heart of the sun. And this is taking place at the same time as the new moon. You can see that at the same time, Mercury and Jupiter are just coming off from their conjunction. Both are coming off trines to Pluto. That figures prominently into this lunation cycle as well. You can also see that the Sun, Moon, and Venus at 16 degrees forming the new moon are also engaging with a square to Saturn. Saturn is in Pisces in the superior position, which means that Saturn is exerting a lot of pressure over the formation of this cycle. And that's something that these planets are going to have to deal with. These planets are well equipped to deal with the demands of Saturn. Saturn is in the power of Jupiter. Saturn is in the power of Venus in Pisces. And so Venus and Jupiter being co-present in Gemini for this cycle, it's not the worst thing in the world. We're going to find that we're able to navigate or negotiate the needs or demands of Saturn over the cycle, but we have the resources to do so as well, with Mercury being present in the sign of Gemini. We're going to go over some of these details next. But it is a cycle where we're negotiate. There's a lot of fun and excitement forming in the sign of Gemini, very airy cycle. But there's this strong need from Saturn in a water sign that will play a big role in the cycle ahead. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run through some of the key features of this new moon in Gemini that I think we ought to pay attention to. And we'll try to make them both both some technically sound observations, but also give you some practical takeaways. So number one is that at the time of the new moon, and again, it really depends on the form of measurement you use for cazimi. Some will say that Venus has just left her cazimi, but it's very close. So we're going to say that this new moon picks up on the Venus cazimi. And what's important is to notice that at 16 Gemini, Venus is also in her own bound. So when Venus is at the heart of the sun and in her own bound, she really has the ability to shape she has the ability to shape the vision or the plan for the lunar cycle ahead. She is at the heart of what the new moon is about and what the entirety of this next cycle is about. That means that at the heart of the next lunar cycle are the needs or interests of a reborn, reset Venus. So new values, new love interests, new styles, new hairdos, new colors, new people, new relationships, new ideas or thoughts that are governing our relationships, new stimulating people in our lives. So you just think of Venus in Gemini and all that she represents as the goddess of love, sex, relationships, pleasure, art, beauty, women, the feminine, everything that she represents, which is also going through this strong reset and moment of empowerment. And that's toning the entirety of the lunar cycle in her own bound at the heart of the sun. It's a very powerful Venus. So knowing that the Venus in Gemini rules the cycle ahead, you can start thinking about Venus and Gemini combinations. Venus in Gemini is playful, flirtatious, open-minded, ready to try new things at this reset moment that are mercurial, meaning new ideas, new people, new stimulating conversations, new organizational strategies, new implementations of technology, redone or rethought values or visions of Venus. So it's exciting in the sense that this really is, especially with Mercury and Jupiter co-present, both benefics in the same place. The host Mercury in Gemini is there to provide. You get this feeling that Venus is well-resourced and well-equipped to enact what she wants in this cycle. It's just pretty cool. Now, the thing that we have to pay close attention to, the kind of like the caveat, I guess you would say, is that this reset for Venus is immediately checked by Saturn. However, this is not all bad. So you can see right here, whoa, the big arrow came out. Well, it's been a while, friend. It has been a while. All right. So Saturn at about the 18th degree of Pisces is immediately checking the reset of Venus. So if we take this forward just a couple of days, we'll see that Venus will go through the square to Saturn by June 8th. And the sun then goes through the square by June 9th. So right away after the new moon, which comes through on the 6th, we have the 7th, 8th, and 9th, where we see the squares from Venus and the sun immediately playing out. So that's a very powerful configuration. Now, what might that mean? Well, what does Saturn in Pisces need or want. Remember, Saturn in this position in the zodiac, imagine that Saturn's looking into the center of the circle like a person, and it's facing into the center of the circle. The aspect coming off the right-hand side of Saturn is called a superior aspect, which means that Saturn is exerting a kind of dominant pressure over this new moon. So you imagine just kind of free, happy Venus in Gemini, reset at the heart of the sun, doing what she wants, Jupiter there, Mercury there. Yeah, but now there's also like a requirement, a strong conflicting stance from Saturn and Pisces. We say conflicting because squares are of the nature of Mars. And so that aspect is demanding. And overcoming, in the overcoming position, it is demanding and possibly frustrating or limiting. And it provides some kind of hurdle for us to jump over, or more specifically, for Venus to jump over. So, with all of that in mind, we have to, again, ask the question, what would Saturn and Pisces want archetypally that could create some kind of conflict or tension or hurdle to overcome in the lunar cycle? Saturn and Pisces, first and foremost, can exert emotional needs. Like if you think about Saturn as requirements or limitations or restrictions or barriers that have to be overcome through this kind of square, well, then in Pisces, those are likely to be weighty emotional truths or realities, overwhelming emotional requirements or obligations. For example, I'll just make something up. Let's say that Gemini represents the desire to go to the mall with your friends when you're 15, you know. It's like just like, let's go have fun. I don't know if anyone does that anymore. So Saturn in Pisces exerting its power in the overcoming square might be something like, I'm sorry, but your sister is sick and you have to stay at home and watch her because dad and I have to work. Right? So there's a sense of emotional obligation to something larger than ourselves that is overwhelming, overriding, and it just sort of checks the ability of these planets in Gemini to move forth freely, easily, in a sort of fun, joyful, uninhibited manner. So you think about sacrifices that have to be made emotionally, financially. Just when you're ready to take off, oh, there's a surprise bill. Or like, let's just say another one would be, because Saturn in Pisces can represent any kind of larger or transcendent emotional boundary or limit or requirement or sacrifice or obligation. So think about it that way. You get this broad sense of, you know, all the Gemini planets are really excited about new possibilities and a sort of circulation of new people and ideas and excitement. And there's a kind of uninhibited, there's a quality of freedom to all of the planets in Gemini, and open-mindedness and curiosity and playfulness and exploration. Saturn in Pisces just sort of says you're not going to be able to play that way because there is some overarching bigger concern or requirement or sacrifice that has to be made. Okay, so that's what we're looking at in this cycle. Now, let's think of a few more things. Saturn in Pisces could be about like requirement, like emotional maturity. Saturn in Pisces can represent the need to remember your greater sense of duty or obligation to the world. Like Gemini is not thinking, when you're going to the mall, let's just keep with that analogy. You're going to the mall. You're not thinking about world peace, you know. There's something so youthful and fun about Gemini that it can lose touch with broader or bigger obligations or responsibilities. Now, the potential that I see in this square from Saturn would be something like to marry something very playful with something very wise. So the combination of these planets I see as something like emotional maturity and emotional intelligence, where you have the kind of the sense of what is mental and rational and communicative and playful and fun in Gemini, and curious and open-minded, meeting with the greater depth and sensibilities emotionally of Saturn and Neptune and Pisces, because all these planets will also square Neptune later in the month. But regardless, the benefit here might be that we're able to be both playful, experimental, open-minded, and yet not reckless or immature. That there's an opportunity between these planets and Saturn to bring the mental sphere into a wiser emotional place. Here's one of the things that I think about for this cycle. One of the images that comes to my mind is, you guys remember the I'm going to take the screen down for a second so I can look at you. So you guys remember Fantasia, the Sorcerer's Apprentice. It reminds me of all the planets in Gemini. There's something about all these planets in Gemini that reminds me of the Magician card, for example, in the Tarot. And when, Mickey Mouse, he puts on the hat and he gets the magical powers, and it's just sort of playful and fun and wild. And then all of a sudden everything's out of control and there's flooding. Remember all the water that starts coming in, and I think he's like standing on a bucket or something. So if you think about these planets in Gemini getting checked by Saturn and Pisces, I also think about like Harry Potter. Before I try to put a bow on this, let me think about Harry Potter for a second. I've watched the movies with my kids, haven't read the books. There is a lot of maturing that has to happen for Harry Potter to be able to handle the magic he's learning, so that it isn't just sort of wild. Or I think about the brooms that they get, and he can't ride them right away, right? Because it's like he has to get a handle on the magic that he's learning. This is a very, very common archetypal theme. When you come into contact with something magical and playful and exciting and powerful, and there's a sense of like, I have a magic wand with all these planets in Gemini, and the magic wand wants me to have fun. But very quickly we learn that there is a responsibility that comes with the magic wand, and we have to be able to take some kind of elder advice about how to wield the magic wand, just like the Sorcerer's Apprentice. There's something youthful and eager and playful and mischievous about all these planets in Gemini. And there's something like the experience of Mickey getting overwhelmed with the wand, or Harry having to learn how to ride the broom. Those are the images that come to my mind. The other thing that comes to my mind is, like, for example, in the Lord of the Rings, you also have this sense of there's a way in which Frodo, as he's carrying the ring, has to learn when it is and isn't the right time to use it, because it's very powerful. So there's that whole line, and this exists in, like, I think about the Spider-Man movies. It's that quote about great power comes great responsibility. It can be really deceptive, the sign of Gemini, how powerful it is, because it feels so light and playful. It's like the magician with all of the tools of his craft, like, laid out on the table in that tarot card. But if you don't take the feedback, there's going to be some feedback that requires us to sort of grow up and be a little bit more careful with how we play. And I think, for example, of Gemini as going out dancing, but making sure, for example, that when you go out dancing and having fun, that you're careful about how much you drink, or that you're careful about being with the right people that are your friends, that are going to have your back when it comes to getting home safely. Just stuff like that, the kind of rites of passage we go through as kids that have to learn that, in eternal children within us are always learning this, right? That it's fine to have fun, but be smart about how you have fun. It's fine to be magical, but be wise about your relation with what is magical. Can there be a way in which the tension between the playful, the magical, the mischievous, the open-minded, the experimental qualities of Gemini pair with the sort of elder wisdom of Saturn and Pisces? That's a very positive way of looking at this cycle. Some of us, the check from Saturn will feel limiting. It will feel like, I just want to have fun, and there's something requiring something of, someone or something that requires some kind of sacrifice, and I don't want to make it, and it's a rain on my parade. Be patient, be curious, stay flexible with respect to what comes up and asks us to sacrifice or temporarily feel a limitation. That's what I would say for this cycle. Well, number 3, host Mercury is co-present in Gemini and just separating from benefic Jupiter. Now, this to me is reason to be excited and not too worried. First of all, Mercury combusts the sun, but protected in its own chariot. And coming off from the, if we go back to the time of the new moon, coming off the conjunction to Jupiter, coming off from the trine to Pluto, I would say that Mercury is bringing a fresh set of resources. That's a, kind of a big metaphor, right? And it might not make practical sense. But what I want to say is this: we will have everything we need in this cycle to address and deal with the obligations, requirements, or checks that Saturn provides. If Saturn has some kind of bill that's due, or some kind of karmic obligation or requirement, or test of our maturity, test of our patience, it will come, but we will have the resources we need. Both benefics are co-present. Venus is in her own bound, and cazimi at the heart of the sun at the new moon, even though she's getting checked by Saturn. By the way, Saturn is in her exaltation. So Saturn is also reliant upon what Venus has right now. And that means that Saturn can't just strip Venus of everything that she has or everything she wants to do, because Saturn's actually dependent upon her. Saturn is also dependent upon Jupiter, and Jupiter is in this sign. Mercury is the host of this sign, providing for all of them from a strong position. So, excuse me, when you take that technical information, it is all just to say that we should have everything we need to provide for whatever check Saturn places on us during this cycle. There should be a way of being able to be flexible and adaptable and find what we need to take care of Saturn's demand or request over the karma of this cycle. So I know that's abstract. I know it is. It's like, but you'll know what it means if you pay attention to it during the cycle. What are the things that are coming up and kind of halting your progress or making you feel like you got a hitch in your giddy up? You'll also find that you have what you need to deal with it. And that's a good sign in this cycle. Number 4 is that Jupiter's coming off a trine to Pluto. Let us not forget that Jupiter-Pluto trines are incredibly powerful times of renewing, revising, deepening, and transforming the structures of our lives philosophically, ideologically, morally, spiritually. And so this cycle and the check that Saturn is providing is also participating in a kind of larger revisioning of our beliefs. And so that's a good thing. Whatever this check is, it's playing right into the need to revise or amend the way we look at things paradigmatically. And so think about it from that standpoint. It kind of gets pretty big picture. It's like this is actually going to present us with a kind of philosophical test that will contribute to the ongoing revolution of thought paradigms in our life. And number 5, all Gemini planets will later square Neptune in Pisces. So where the cycle begins with some rigidity and some taxation and requirements, it's interesting because one way of looking at it would be that it ends with everything dissolving, with all those hard boundaries being washed away. Another way of looking at it would be to say that the encounter with Saturn might feel like a reality check, but by the end of the cycle, there's a reiteration of everything magical and otherworldly. We're not being asked to forfeit the magical, playful, side of Gemini this cycle. We're just being asked to, just to work with things along the way that could be a little frustrating, but the magic is not being stripped. I really see these final squares that take place as the cycle goes on. Let's move them ahead. So you can see that Venus goes through the square by June 16th to Neptune in Pisces, then Mercury on the same day. Then the two planets can join in Cancer. That'll be beautiful. And then we have the sun squaring Neptune by June 20th. So right by about the solstice, right around the solstice, we have all these planets going through squares to Neptune in Pisces. And so I really do feel like, the end of this cycle is very redeeming and emotionally rewarding and satisfying. And there's a magic to all of this. There really is. It's a very magical period where if we can accept some of the Saturnian sacrifices being placed on the cycle, I feel like there's a redeeming quality to it by the end, that tide that lifts all boats. And everything is kind of lifted by the end, I think, with these very magical connections to Neptune and Pisces. So the magic will not be ruined, is the point I'm trying to make here. There are many other things that can be said about all of these transits, which we will be exploring as the month goes on, as the lunar cycle unfolds, I should say. So the the point of an episode like this is to really look at the big picture, the signature of the new moon, and how it's going to tone things going forward. You have to be someone who pays attention to lunar cycles for this to make any sense, really. I mean, you might notice in the next week or so after the new moon, you may remember some of these things, but I would highly recommend tracking, just doing a little journaling and tracking the themes between new moon, first quarter, full, and last quarter. The first 3 or 4 years of my practice, I journaled on every quarter moon. So new, first quarter, full, last quarter, new. And I would just jot down like half a page, a couple of paragraphs about what was happening. And you will notice the ebb and flow, especially if you are someone who pays attention to the themes happening around the new and full moons. It's a really nice way to practice. But again, I give you that tip just so that you also don't feel like it's kind of bad practice to listen to astrology and not track it, because then it all feels like it's just jumble in your head. You have to be in some little practices of trying to notice, observe, take note of the manifestation of the symbols in your lives. And so just, unsolicited advice, keep a journal if you don't already. I think it's a great practice to have. It can help you take these notes to another level. All right, we'll leave it there for today. Thank you guys for listening. After I sign off, you can hear more about the upcoming Horary program. It's a very magical form of astrology, by the way, that I recommend that you check out at some point, if not this time, maybe next, but listen for more after I sign off. All right, take it easy, everyone. Bye. Hey, everyone. Thanks for sticking around. I'm going to tell you guys more about the upcoming Horary astrology program, which begins later in June. And I hope that if you have never learned anything about Horary, that you will, at least in listening to this, be exposed to Horary astrology, have a little bit of an understanding of what it is. And if not now, then maybe sometime in the future, you can take time to study it. It is one of the forms of astrology that dates back to the earliest eras of astrology, the Hellenistic era, the medieval era, the early Indian period of astrology. And it is a branch of astrology that is concerned with specific predictive questions. So, for example, a horary question is usually formed in terms of a yes or no answer, and it is cast from the location of the astrologer at the time that the astrologer receives the question. So a typical horary question might be, will I get the job? Or will we get married? Or my cat went missing, will she come back? There are applications of horary astrology that involve the location of missing items, like where is my missing pen? Or where is, I actually helped a farmer one time locate a missing bull that had gotten out of the pasture. So it's a really, really fascinating form of astrology. It's very old, and it is like the birth chart of a question, a predictive question. So again, if I receive a question from someone and it's like, will I get the job? Then I cast that chart at the time I get the question. I usually use the receipt of the email time. And then I cast a chart for that question. And there are a series of traditional techniques that have been around for a very long time, thousands of years, that are used to determine the answer to that question. So with that in mind, let me show you a chart and you can learn, see what it's like in real time. So this chart is, the question that was asked is, will my spouse keep his job? This is a woman who had some very good reason to worry that her spouse might be getting laid off. And so she wanted to know, so she could prepare herself, is he in fact going to be laid off from his job? And so when I receive that question, that's a horary question. When I receive it at 9:03 a.m. on April 10th of 2023, a little over a year ago, here in Minnetonka, Minnesota, where I live, I cast a chart that becomes the birth chart of that question. I then use a series of techniques, and that's what you're going to learn in the Horary program, are those techniques that go into answering all different kinds of questions. Questions about jobs, questions about money, questions about health, questions about marriage or relationships, questions about babies, questions about in pregnancy. I mean, you name it. And even missing pets and people and missing items. You see a lot of different approaches in Horary. And so over the course of a year, we study those approaches to different kinds of questions, and we practice with different charts of different questions, learning the techniques so that we can have this predictive tool in our kit as an astrologer. So anyway, here's a question: will spouse keep his job? In Horary, what happens is you are always looking at the planets that represent the people and aspects of the question. The person asking the question is called the querent. The querent is always given the ruler of the ascendant and usually the moon. as a co-signifier of the querent. So in this case, Gemini is rising. So we're going to give Mercury to the querent and the moon. Well, we can see the moon is sitting right on the cusp of the 7th house of marriage, which shows us that the querent, the person asking the question, is indeed really concerned about their spouse. The placement of the moon gives that away because it's sitting on the cusp of the 7th, which is going to be the house of the partner. So you see little things like that. They're a little wink that you have you have a radical chart, so to speak. Now, the 7th house ruler is going to be the spouse. That's Jupiter, since Sagittarius sits on the 7th house cusp. In Horary, we use quadrant-based houses because the theory was all developed through quadrant-based house systems, which is interesting. So this is the only place in my practice that I teach from and use a quadrant-based house system, not whole sign. Anyway, it's really fascinating to look at this chart because Jupiter is going to represent the spouse. So we can see Jupiter over here, about to be conjoined by the sun. Then we look at the spouse's job. And the spouse's job is going to be the 10th house from the spouse. The 10th house from the 7th is going to be the ruler of the 4th. That's called derived houses. This is something that appears in Horary quite a bit. So if we take the spouse as house 1 and we count 1 through 10 from house 7, we get to the cusp of house 4 for the 10th from the 7th, or the spouse's job. That is the sun. So here we see that the sun, exalted sun in Aries, is about to conjoin Jupiter. This means that Jupiter is combust. And when Jupiter is combust like that so badly and the sun is about to conjoin it, that is a moment of death for Jupiter. So the job, we know that combustion from a planet like that is often implied in the charts of death, or that's a condition of debility for Jupiter at the hands of the exalted sun. And Jupiter is, of course, sitting on the 12th house cusp, which is the derived 6th from the 7th house of the spouse, a place that was associated with misfortune. So we can see that this is a very clear indication that that Jupiter is being debilitated by, burnt up by the job, and that moment that's coming of the conjunction could be positively looked at as maybe a death and rebirth of your career. But the first thing that's happening is the death. When it is a possibility built into the question that he could be one of the people that's about to be laid off at his company, and you have this kind of symbolism, this is very clearly a yes, your husband is about to be laid off because of that combustion and the upcoming combustion and conjunction from the sun. Now you might say, what about cazimi? Doesn't the cazimi mean like a rebirth? Yeah, but not first, right? The first thing that happens is that Jupiter is being burnt up by the sun. When the sun is the job and Jupiter is the spouse, and there is a possibility that this kind of event happens, then yes, that is exactly what happens. We can also see, if we take out the outer planets, which is something we toggle back and forth in our horary class, we take out the outer planets and we can also see that the very next thing that is going to happen is the moon, as an indicator of the flow of events, is about to trine the sun and then immediately hit Jupiter, which means that the moon is also translating the light from the sun to Jupiter. And when the sun is acting here as a malefic, burning Jupiter up, this is another sign that the flow of events is going to lead that malefic sun to eliminate Jupiter. The malefic sun only in this context because Jupiter is combust. So anyway, these are little rules of horary, and there's a ton of them, right? For every different kind of question, there are different ways of assigning planets to the parts of a question, and there are different techniques that we use to answer the question. In that case, the judgment of the chart was, it does look as though your husband is going to be laid off, and indeed, that was the outcome. Her husband was laid off within a week. So the way that I framed it in the answer was very uplifting, because I said, this is when we see this kind of event, a Jupiter Sun cazimi, which we've had in the sky recently just now too, as I'm making this, that can be a sign of rebirth. So even if there's a death and a loss here of job, the opportunity for this to be a career reset is also implied by the transition of this Jupiter Sun conjunction. And she did write to me later in the summer last year to tell me that he found a new job. So, and it was indeed a positive reset. So half of the art of horary is delivering the news. How do you deliver a predictive result without increasing someone's anxiety, in a way that's constructive? How do we take what we see and translate it for someone when the question is predictive? And there's often a lot of people have a lot of emotion invested in the outcome. So this is a beautiful form of astrology. If you are interested in studying it, here is how to register. You go over to the website, which is nightlightastrology.com, and you are going to go to the courses page. And when you're on the courses page, you're going to click on the Horary course. You need to have a background in understanding dignities, aspects, and house meanings. And then it starts on June 22nd. At the bottom, you will find that there is need-based tuition assistance. And there are also payment plans that you can utilize, and a one-time payment saves a little bit of money. So, but if you need tuition assistance because it would be impossible for you to take the program otherwise, please be sure to check that out and come study Horary. It's an amazing, amazing form of astrology. If I could do nothing but practice Horary, I would, because it is so interesting to see the unique picture of each situation come to life in the context of a Horary reading. There's no birth chart needed for it either. It's amazing that astrology can work that way. We always think, oh, it has to work off from a birth chart. No. We can use astrology just like we use tarot cards. Cast them out at the moment a unique question comes up. Cast a chart at the moment of a question, and you have a series of techniques and approaches that can help you answer it. So that's Horary in a nutshell. I hope to see you guys there, and thanks for listening.